1885, Montana Territory. When Martha Hayes stumbled through the ranch gates, clutching her dying infant, covered in blood and cast out by her own family for bearing a cursed child, the last thing she expected was for the silent cowboy who never spoke to anyone to whisper 3 words that would change everything. "You're staying here." But what could a mysterious drifter with a shadowed past possibly want with a desperate mother and her sickly baby, and would his secrets destroy them all, or finally give them the family they were both denied? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn wind cut through Martha Hayes like a blade as she stumbled down the dirt road, her arms wrapped tight around the bundle pressed against her chest. Blood stained the hem of her cotton dress, and her bare feet left crimson prints in the dust. Every step sent fire through her body, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Behind her, 3 miles back, stood the farmhouse where she'd been born 22 years ago. The same house where just hours earlier, her mother had looked at the newborn baby, so small, so frighteningly still, and said the words that would haunt Martha forever. "That child is marked by God's judgment. You brought shame to this family, and now you've birthed death itself." Martha's father hadn't even looked at her. He'd simply pointed to the door, his weathered hand trembling with rage or grief, she couldn't tell which. Her 2 brothers had stood silent as sentinels, their faces carved from stone. And her sister, Clara, the one who used to braid Martha's hair and whisper secrets in the dark, had turned her back entirely. The baby in Martha's arms made a sound not quite a cry, more like a kitten's mewl, weak, struggling. The local doctor had taken one look at the infant's bluish tinge, the way her tiny chest labored for each breath, and shaken his head. "Lung fever, probably. Won't make it through the night." Seen it before in early births. But Martha had seen something else in his eyes, judgment, as if the baby's sickness was proof of Martha's sin, proof that an unwed mother deserved exactly what she got. She adjusted the thin blanket around her daughter's face, shielding her from the wind. The baby's name was Clara, after the sister who'd abandoned her. Martha had whispered it to her just once, when they were alone in the barn where she'd given birth on the hay, with only the horses as witnesses to her agony. The sun was setting, now painting the Montana sky in shades of amber and blood. Martha had no destination, no plan. She only knew she had to keep walking, had to keep her baby warm, had to find something, anything before nightfall brought the killing cold. That's when she saw it. Through the gathering dusk, a ranch emerged like a mirage. Split-rail fences stretched across rolling hills where cattle grazed in the distance. A 2-story house stood solid and square, smoke rising from its chimney. Barns and outbuildings dotted the property, and golden light glowed from the windows. Martha's legs nearly gave out at the sight. Civilization, warmth, maybe mercy. She forced herself forward, her vision swimming. The baby had gone quiet again, too quiet. Martha's heart hammered against her ribs as she pushed through the ranch gate, which hung slightly open as if welcoming her in. "Help!" she tried to call out, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Please, someone help." A dog barked from somewhere near the barn, then voices low and masculine. Martha's knees buckled, and she fell forward onto the dirt, curling herself around the baby to protect her from the impact. Footsteps, running, multiple people. "Jesus Christ, there's a woman. She's bleeding. Get the boss now." Hands reached for her, and Martha flinched, clutching the baby tighter. "Don't take her," she gasped. "Please don't take my baby." "Ma'am, nobody's taking anything. We need to get you inside." The voice belonged to an older man with kind eyes and silver threading through his dark hair. "Can you stand?" Martha shook her head. Everything was spinning now, the adrenaline that had carried her 3 miles finally deserting her. "Somebody get a blanket," another voice shouted. "Where's Caleb?" That name Caleb seemed to carry weight. The men around her shifted, glancing toward the barn. Then the crowd parted. A man emerged from the shadows, tall and lean, wearing dusty work clothes and a hat pulled low over his face. He moved with the careful grace of someone who never rushed, never panicked. As he drew closer, Martha could see his features' sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw darkened with stubble, and eyes the color of a winter sky. He knelt beside her without a word, those pale eyes taking in everything. Her bloody dress, her bare feet, the bundle she protected like a treasure. "The baby," Martha whispered, her vision going dark at the edges. "She's sick. Please, I have nowhere else." The man Caleb reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he gently pulled back the blanket to look at the infant. The baby's lips had a bluish tint, her breathing shallow and rapid. Something flickered across Caleb's face. Pain, maybe. Or recognition. He stood abruptly and turned to the gathered ranch hands. "Vernon, ride to town and bring Doc Morrison. Tell him it's urgent." His voice was quiet but carried absolute authority. "Garrett, heat water and gather clean linens. The rest of you, back to your work." The men scattered to obey. Caleb looked down at Martha again, and for a long moment he said nothing. She could see him thinking, calculating, deciding. This was his ranch, his domain, and she was a stranger who'd brought trouble to his doorstep. Finally, he spoke, his words deliberate and careful, as if he rationed them like precious currency. "Can you walk if I help you?" Martha tried to nod, but darkness was closing in fast. She felt herself falling, heard the baby's weak cry, and then strong arms caught her, lifting both her and the infant as if they weighed nothing. Through her fading consciousness, she felt the steady rhythm of Caleb's heartbeat, felt the security of being carried toward warmth and light. The last thing she heard before the darkness took her was his voice, low and final, speaking to someone at the house's entrance. "Both of you are staying here." When Martha's eyes fluttered open, she didn't know how much time had passed. Minutes? Hours? The room around her was unfamiliar, a simple bedroom with rough-hewn walls, a dresser, a washstand. Clean white curtains framed a window, where dawnlight was just beginning to creep in. Dawn. She'd lost the entire night. Martha bolted upright, ignoring the screaming pain in her body, and her eyes flew around the room in panic. "Clara!" she gasped. "Where's my—" "Right here." The voice came from the corner of the room. Martha's head whipped around to find Caleb sitting in a wooden chair, cradling her baby against his chest. The infant was wrapped in fresh blankets, her tiny face peaceful in sleep. A cup of what looked like warm milk sat on the table beside him. Caleb stood slowly, moving toward Martha with her daughter. "Doc Morrison came, said her lungs are weak but not beyond help. He left medicine drops to be given every 4 hours. She took some milk an hour ago." Martha's hands trembled as she reached for her baby. When Clara was safely back in her arms, she held her close and finally let the tears come great, shuddering sobs of relief and exhaustion and grief for everything she'd lost. She didn't notice Caleb moving toward the door until he spoke again. "You'll stay until you're healed, both of you. Nobody will cast you out from here." Martha looked up at him through her tears, this strange, quiet man who'd shown her more mercy in one night than her own family had in a lifetime. "Why?" she whispered. "You don't know me. You don't know what I've done." Caleb's hand rested on the doorframe, and for just a moment, something ancient and painful crossed his face. "Maybe that's exactly why," he said quietly. And then he was gone, leaving Martha alone with her daughter and 100 questions burning in her chest. Questions about this mysterious cowboy who spoke in careful whispers and carried a sadness as deep as her own. 3 days passed before Martha felt strong enough to leave the bedroom. 3 days of sleeping in a real bed, of waking to find fresh water in the basin and warm broth left on the knitstand. 3 days of administering Doc Morrison's medicine. To baby Clara, watching with desperate hope as the bluish tint faded from her daughter's lips and her breathing grew steadier. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. On the fourth morning, Martha wrapped herself in a borrowed robe, too large clearly, meant for a man, and ventured into the hallway. The house was quiet, but she could hear sounds drifting up from below, the clatter of dishes, the low murmur of male voices, the creak of floorboards under heavy boots. She found the stairs and descended slowly, one hand gripping the rail, the other cradling Clara against her shoulder. The baby was awake, her dark eyes taking in the world with what seemed like newfound curiosity. The kitchen was larger than her entire family's farmhouse parlor. A massive cast-iron stove dominated one wall, and a long wooden table stretched down the center of the room, scarred from years of use. 4 men sat around it, tin cups of coffee steaming in front of them, and they all looked up when Martha appeared in the doorway. The silver-haired man from her first night, Vernon, she remembered, stood immediately. "Ma'am, you should be resting. Doc said at least a week before." "I can't stay in bed anymore," Martha interrupted softly. "And I need to earn my keep. I won't be a burden." The other men exchanged glances. One of them, younger with red hair and freckles, cleared his throat. "Miss Hayes, the boss already said you're staying." "You don't need to. Where is he?" Martha asked. "Your boss." "Caleb." "Out with the herd," Vernon answered. "Been gone since before dawn. Won't be back until sundown, most likely, of course." Martha had barely seen him since that first night. He'd checked on them twice, once the morning after they arrived, standing in the doorway like a ghost, asking in that quiet voice if they had everything they needed. And once the second evening, when he'd brought the doctor back to examine Clara again. Both times, he'd barely looked at Martha. Both times he'd left before she could properly thank him. "Then I'll start by cleaning this kitchen," Martha said, moving toward the basin. "And I can cook if you'll tell me what supplies you have." Vernon started to protest, but the red-haired man, Garrett, Martha learned, grinned. "Ma'am, if you can cook better than Vernon's burnt bacon, we'll build you a shrine." "My bacon isn't burnt, you ungrateful." The kitchen erupted in good-natured argument, and for the first time in months, Martha felt something close to warmth in her chest. Not happiness, she wasn't sure she'd ever feel that again, but something like safety. She set Clara in a basket near the window where the baby could watch the morning light, then rolled up her sleeves and got to work. By the time the sun reached its peak, Martha had scrubbed every surface in the kitchen, organized the pantry, which was surprisingly well stocked, and prepared a stew that filled the house with the smell of sage and beef. The ranch hands had drifted in and out all morning, initially trying to help, but eventually just staying out of her way, and stealing biscuits when they thought she wasn't looking. She learned their names and their stories in fragments. Vernon had worked this ranch for 15 years, since before Caleb owned it. Garrett was saving money to buy his own land someday. There was Miguel, who handled the horses with a gift that bordered on magic, and Thomas, the quietest of them all besides Caleb, who'd lost his family to cholera and found a new one here. None of them would tell her anything about Caleb. "That's his story to share, ma'am," Vernon said when she finally asked directly. "Not ours." Martha was checking on the stew when she heard footsteps on the porch, heavier than the ranch hands, more deliberate. She turned just as Caleb pushed through the door, hat in hand, his face shadowed with trail dust. He stopped short when he saw her standing at his stove. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Martha became acutely aware of how she must look wearing a borrowed dress that didn't fit right, her hair pulled back in a simple braid, her hands red from scrubbing. She lifted her chin anyway, meeting his pale eyes. "I made supper," she said. Simply, "I hope that's acceptable." Caleb's gaze moved from her to the stove, to the clean kitchen, to baby Clara sleeping peacefully in her basket. Something unreadable crossed his face. "You should be resting," he finally said. "I've been resting for 3 days. I need to be useful. You're healing. That's useful enough. Mr. Martha realized she didn't even know his last name. I don't know what to call you. Caleb is fine, Mr. Caleb then. You took us in when you had no reason to. You've given us food and shelter and medicine. I won't repay that kindness by being useless. Caleb set his hat on a peg by the door, his movements slow and careful. He walked to the basin and washed his hands, and Martha noticed the scars on his knuckles, the rope burns on his palms, the hands of a man who knew hard work intimately. This ranch, he said quietly, not looking at her, has been running without a woman's touch for a long time. If you want to cook and clean, I won't stop you. But you're not here to earn your keep, Martha. You're here because you need a place to heal, and your daughter needs a place to grow strong. That's all. The way he said her name gentle, like it was something precious, made her throat tight. Why? She asked again, the same question she'd asked that first night. You don't know me. You don't know what people will say about you, harboring an unwed mother. You don't know what I might bring to your door. Caleb turned then, and the look in his eyes was so raw, so full of old pain, that Martha took an involuntary step back. I know exactly what people will say, he told her. And I stopped caring about that a long time ago. He moved past her toward the hallway, then paused at the doorway. Your daughter, he said, still not looking back. Clara, that's what you call her? Yes, it's a good name. Then he was gone, his footsteps fading up the stairs, leaving Martha alone with her bubbling stew and her sleeping baby, and a mystery that seemed to deepen with every encounter. That evening, the ranch hands gathered around the table for supper, and Martha served them her stew with fresh bread she'd managed to bake in the afternoon. They ate with the enthusiasm of men who'd been living on burnt bacon for too long, praising every bite. Caleb ate in silence at the head of the table, his plate clean but his expression distant. When Martha moved to collect the dishes, he finally spoke. The bedroom you're in, he said quietly. It's yours for as long as you need it. There's a cradle in the attic that Vernon can bring down for Clara, and in town there's a seamstress who can make proper clothes. I'll have Vernon take your measurements tomorrow. Martha's hands stilled on the dishes. I can't accept. You can. Caleb stood, pushing his chair back. And you will. Your daughter needs you healthy and whole. That means proper clothes, proper rest, and proper care. No arguments. He grabbed his hat and headed for the door, clearly intending to escape before she could protest further. Caleb, Martha called after him. He stopped, his hand on the doorframe. Thank you, she said, putting everything she felt, all the gratitude, all the confusion, all the desperate hope into those two words. Caleb didn't turn around, but his shoulders tensed. For a moment, Martha thought he might say something. Instead, he just nodded once and disappeared into the night, leaving her to wonder about the shadows in his eyes and the secrets he kept locked behind that careful silence. Later that night, after the dishes were done and Clara was fed and sleeping, Martha stood at her bedroom window and looked out over the ranch. In the distance, she could see a light burning in one of the barns, Caleb's silhouette moving past the window, checking on the horses even at this late hour. A man who never stopped working. A man who spoke in whispers and carried old wounds. A man who'd saved her life without asking for anything in return. Martha pressed her hand against the cool glass and made a silent vow. She would uncover his secrets. She would understand why he'd shown her mercy. And somehow, she would find a way to heal whatever darkness haunted the quiet cowboy who'd given her a home when the whole world had cast her out. 2 weeks into her stay at the ranch, Martha finally ventured into town. Vernon drove the wagon, with Martha sitting beside him holding Clara, who had grown noticeably stronger. The baby's cheeks had filled out, her breathing came easy now, and she'd started making small cooing sounds that filled Martha with fierce joy. The town of Bridgewater was smaller than Martha, expected a single main street lined with wooden buildings, their false fronts painted in fading colors. A general store, a saloon, a church with a white steeple, a bank, and the doctor's office. People moved along the boardwalks, their faces weathered by sun and wind. The moment Martha stepped down from the wagon, she felt the stares. A woman in a blue dress whispered something to her companion, both of them looking Martha up and down with narrowed eyes. Two men standing outside the saloon stopped their conversation to watch her pass. Even the shopkeeper sweeping his front steps paused mid-stroke, his expression hardening. Vernon noticed too. His jaw tightened, and he moved closer to Martha's side, a silent show of protection. "Don't pay them any mind," he murmured. "Small towns talk. That's all they know how to do." But Martha knew it was more than idle gossip. She could feel the weight of their judgment, could practically hear their thoughts. Unwed mother. Shameful woman. Living with men on that ranch, who knows what goes on there? They stopped first at the seamstress shop, a tidy building with lace curtains in the windows. The bell chimed as they entered, and a woman looked up from her sewing, middle-aged, with graying hair pinned in a severe bun and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "Vernon," she said coolly, her gaze sliding to Martha. "And this must be the woman staying at the Brennan Ranch." Brennan, so that was Caleb's surname. Martha filed the information away. Double quotes, "Mrs. Foster," Vernon said with strained politeness. "We're here for some dresses, Mr. Brennan's orders." Mrs. Foster set down her needle with deliberate slowness. "I see. And how exactly will this be paid for?" "Same as always. Put it on Mr. Brennan's account." The seamstress's lips pressed into a thin line. She stood and approached Martha, circling her like a predator assessing prey. Martha forced herself to stand still, to keep her chin up, even as Clara squirmed in her arms. "Turn," Mrs. Foster commanded. Martha obeyed, turning slowly while the woman took measurements with rough, impersonal touches. The whole time, Mrs. Foster's expression remained cold, disapproving. "3 dresses," Vernon said. "Practical ones. And a proper winter coat." "That will take 2 weeks," Mrs. Foster replied. "And the cost will be considerable. Mr. Brennan is good for it, you know that." The seamstress returned to her desk and began writing in a ledger, her pen scratching across the paper with angry strokes. "I wonder," she said without looking up, "if Mr. Brennan understands what he's inviting by harboring a woman of questionable character. This town has standards, Vernon, Christian standards." Heat flooded Martha's cheeks, but before she could respond, Vernon stepped forward. "Mrs. Foster," he said quietly, but with an edge of steel, "you'll speak respectfully, or we'll take our business to the seamstress in Silver Creek. Your choice." The woman's pen stilled. She looked up at Vernon, and something in his expression made her reconsider. Finally she nodded curtly. 2 weeks. The dresses will be ready." Outside, Martha drew in a shaky breath. Clara had started fussing, sensing her mother's distress. "I'm sorry," Vernon said as they walked toward the general store. "Margaret Foster's always been a self-righteous," he caught himself. "Well, she's not a kind woman. But her husband deacon at the church, so she thinks that gives her the right to judge everyone else." "She's not wrong, though," Martha said quietly. "I am a woman of questionable character. I had a child out of wedlock. Stop." Vernon halted in the middle of the boardwalk, turning to face her. "Miss Martha, I don't know your story. Don't need to know it. But I know this. You're a good mother who's doing everything she can for her child. That's all that matters. Anyone who can't see that isn't worth your time." His kindness nearly undid her. Martha blinked back tears and nodded. Adjusting Clara in her arms, they continued to the general store, where the reception was only marginally warmer. The clerk served them efficiently, but without friendliness, his eyes constantly darting to Martha as if expecting her to steal something. When Vernon ordered supplies for the ranch flour, sugar, coffee, canned goods, the clerk barely acknowledged Martha's presence. It was when they were loading the wagon that Martha saw them. 3 women stood across the street near the church, their heads bent together in conversation. One of them looked up, and Martha's heart stopped. Clara, her sister Clara, wearing the same brown dress she'd worn the day she turned her back on Martha. For a moment, their eyes met across the dusty street. Martha saw recognition flash in her sister's face, followed quickly by something else. Shame? Regret? But before Martha could move, could call out, Clara turned away and hurried into the church with her companions, the door slamming shut behind them. The rejection hit Martha like a physical blow. She stood frozen beside the wagon, staring at that closed church door, feeling the wound rip open fresh all over again. Miss Martha? Vernon's voice seemed to come from very far away. You all right? She forced herself to nod, to move, to climb back into the wagon seat. But as they pulled away from town, she couldn't stop looking back at that church, wondering if her sister was watching from one of the windows, wondering if any part of Clara missed her. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Vernon seemed to sense Martha didn't want to talk, and he let the silence stretch, broken only by the creak of the wagon wheels and the rhythmic clip-clop of the horses' hooves. They were nearly home when Vernon finally spoke. You should know, he said carefully, that Caleb, Mr. Brennan, he knows what it's like. Being judged by a town, I mean. Being cast out. Martha looked at him sharply. What do you mean? Vernon kept his eyes on the road ahead. It's not my story to tell, but there's a reason he built this ranch so far from town. A reason he only goes into Bridgewater when absolutely necessary. A reason he doesn't care what people think of him anymore. What happened to him? Like I said, it's his story. But I'll tell you this, Caleb Brennan is the best man I've ever known. He's given every one of us on that ranch a second chance when nobody else would. Thomas was accused of theft in his last town. Turned out he was innocent, but nobody cared. Miguel can't read or write, and most places wouldn't even interview him. Garrett's got a temper that got him fired from 3 ranches before Caleb gave him a chance. And me? Vernon's voice went quiet. I was a drunk who lost everything. Caleb found me sleeping in his barn one night, and instead of throwing me out, he gave me a job and a reason to stay sober. He turned to look at Martha then, his weathered face sincere. What I'm saying is, you're not the first broken person Caleb's brought home. And judging by the way he looks at that baby of yours, you won't be the last. This ranch, it's a place for people who need a second chance. A place where your past doesn't matter as much as who you choose to be now. Martha's throat was too tight to speak. She looked down at Clara, sleeping peacefully in her arms, and thought about the quiet cowboy who'd built a refuge for the lost and wounded. When they pulled into the ranch yard, Caleb was working with one of the horses in the corral, a massive black stallion that fought against the lead rope. But the moment he saw the wagon, he handed the rope to Miguel and walked over, his eyes immediately finding Martha. How was town? He asked Vernon, but his gaze stayed on Martha's face. Fine enough, Vernon replied. Got everything on the list. But Caleb's eyes had narrowed. He saw something in Martha's expression, some lingering hurt from the trip. What happened? Nothing, Martha said quickly. Just small-town gossip. Nothing I can't handle. Caleb studied her for a long moment, those winter sky eyes seeing too much. Then he reached up and took Clara from her arms, cradling the baby with surprising gentleness while he offered Martha his other hand to help her down from the wagon. His palm was warm and calloused against hers, strong and steady. For just a moment, Martha felt anchored, safe, as if nothing in the world could touch her while she stood in the circle of his protection. If anyone in town gave you trouble, Caleb said quietly, you tell me. Understood? It wasn't a question. It was a promise, backed by something fierce and protective in his voice. Martha nodded, unable to look away from his face. In the afternoon light, she could see new details. the small scar above his left eyebrow, the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the shadow of exhaustion that never quite left his features. A man carrying his own burdens, a man who somehow still had room to carry hers. "Thank you," she whispered. Caleb handed Clara back to her, his fingers brushing Martha's for just an instant. Then he stepped back, putting distance between them once more, retreating behind that wall of careful silence. But as he walked away, Martha noticed something she'd missed before. Caleb wasn't heading toward the barn or the house. He was heading toward the wagon, reaching for the supplies Vernon had purchased in town. He was going to carry her burdens, literally and figuratively, without being asked, without expecting thanks, without making a show of it. And Martha realized with a jolt. That sent electricity through her chest. She was beginning to understand Caleb Brennan. Not his past, not his secrets, not yet, but his heart. The core of who he was beneath the silence and the shadows. A protector of the broken. A sanctuary for the lost. And she was starting to fall for him. October brought the first real cold to Montana territory. Martha woke one morning to find frost painting intricate patterns on her bedroom window. And when she went downstairs with Clara bundled in extra blankets, she found the ranch hands huddled around the kitchen stove, their breath visible in the air. "Storm's coming," Thomas announced, looking up from his coffee. "Big one, by the feel of it." Miguel nodded agreement. "The horses know. Been restless all night." Martha poured herself coffee and began preparing breakfast, a routine she'd fallen into naturally over the past month. The kitchen had become her domain, and the men had learned to stay out of her way in the mornings unless they wanted a wooden spoon aimed at their heads. Caleb came in just as she was flipping flapjacks, snow dusting his shoulders and hat. He stamped his boots on the mat and moved to the stove, holding his hands over the heat. "How bad?" Vernon asked him. "Bad enough. We need to bring the cattle down from the high pasture before it hits. Could be a 3-day blow." The men exchanged grim looks. Martha had learned enough about ranching to understand what that meant: hard, dangerous work in freezing conditions, with the constant risk of losing livestock to the cold or getting caught in the storm themselves. "I'll stay with the house," Garrett volunteered. "Someone should be here in case." "No," Caleb interrupted quietly. "I need every man who can ride. We'll all go." Martha turned from the stove. "What about the ranch? The animals here?" "They'll be fine in the barn for a few days. Plenty of feed and water." "And us?" The question slipped out before Martha could stop it. Caleb's eyes met hers, and something unreadable passed across his face. "You'll be safe in the house. Plenty of firewood stacked on the porch. Food in the pantry. Just keep the stove burning and stay inside. We're leaving a woman and baby alone?" Garrett protested. "Boss, that doesn't. She's stronger than you think," Caleb said, still looking at Martha. "Aren't you?" It wasn't really a question. It was a statement of faith, a declaration of trust that made Martha stand a little straighter. "Yes," she said. Firmly, "we'll be fine." Within an hour, the men had assembled their gear: bedrolls, ropes, rifles, extra ammunition. Martha packed food for them, wrapping biscuits and dried meat in cloth bundles, while Clara watched from her basket, making soft noises that sounded almost like worry. The men filed out one by one, each pausing to tip his hat to Martha. Vernon squeezed her shoulder. "Keep that fire burning, Miss Martha. And if anything happens, anything at all, there's a rifle above the door and a bell on the porch. Ring it 3 times and don't stop until help comes." "From where?" Martha asked, looking out at the empty landscape. "The Jacobson Ranch is 5 miles north. They'll hear it if the wind's right." Then they were gone, riding out into the gray morning, leaving Martha alone, with her daughter in a house that suddenly felt far too large and far too quiet. The storm hit that afternoon. It started with wind that howled around the corners of the house like a living thing, making the shutters rattle and the roof timbers groan. Then came the snow, not gentle flakes but hard, driving crystals that turned the world white within minutes. Martha kept the stove burning hot, feeding it log after log from the diminishing pile on the porch. She made sure all the shutters were latched tight, stuffed rags under the doors to keep out drafts, and prepared extra formula for Clara in case the storm lasted longer than expected. By nightfall, the wind was so loud she could barely hear herself think. Snow piled against the windows in drifts that blocked out what little light remained. Martha lit every lamp in the kitchen and sat at the table with Clara in her arms, trying to ignore the way the house shook with each gust. She thought about the men out there somewhere, cold and exposed, working to save the herd. She thought about Caleb, especially his quiet competence, the way he always seemed to know exactly what needed to be done. Was he safe? Was he warm enough? Did he ever think about her the way she'd started thinking about him? The second day was worse. The woodpile on the porch ran out, and Martha had to venture to the barn through waist-deep snow to get more from the larger supplies stored there. The cold was so intense it burned her lungs, and by the time she made it back to the house, dragging logs in a canvas sack, her hands were numb and her face felt frozen. Clara cried more than usual, sensing her mother's anxiety. Martha held her close, singing the lullabies her own mother had once sung to her, trying not to think about the family that had cast her out or the sister who'd turned away. On the third day, the wind finally began to die down. Martha woke to an eerie silence, broken only by the ticking of the kitchen clock and Clara's soft breathing. She moved to the window and scraped away the frost, peering out at a world transformed. Snow covered everything in smooth, perfect drifts that glittered in the weak morning sun. The ranch looked like a painting, beautiful and pristine and utterly lifeless. No sign of the men. No movement anywhere. Martha's chest tightened with worry. They should be back by now. Unless something had gone wrong. Unless someone was hurt. Unless she forced herself to breathe, to think practically. They knew what they were doing. They had experience with these storms. Caleb wouldn't let anything happen to his men. But what if something had happened to Caleb? The thought sent ice through her veins that had nothing to do with the temperature. Martha realized with sudden, startling clarity that somewhere in the past month, Caleb Brennan had become essential to her. Not just as a benefactor or a protector, but as something more. Something she wasn't ready to name. She spent the day watching from the windows, jumping at every sound, hoping each creak and groan was the sound of returning horses. Clara seemed to pick up on her mother's tension, refusing to settle, fussing until Martha's nerves were scraped raw. Sunset came with no sign of the men. Martha lit the lamps again, prepared a simple supper she had no appetite for, and tried to keep her imagination from running wild. But in the darkness, with only the wind's dying whispers for company, it was impossible not to think the worst. She was dozing in a chair near the stove, Clara asleep in her arms when she heard it. The sound of horses. Martha's eyes flew open. She set Clara carefully in her basket and rushed to the door, throwing it open despite the blast of cold air that swept in. Through the darkness and scattered clouds, she could see them silhouettes on horseback, moving slowly up the road to the ranch house. She counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5, all of them. Relief flooded through her so powerfully her knees nearly buckled. But as they drew closer, Martha's relief turned to alarm. Something was wrong. One of the horses was being led rather than ridden, and the man in its saddle was slumped forward, barely holding on. Caleb. Martha didn't think. She grabbed her shawl and ran out into the snow in her house slippers, her heart hammering against her ribs. What happened? She called out as the men pulled up to the house. Boss took a fall, Vernon sighed, his voice tight with worry. Horse spooked during the drive, threw him into a ravine. We got him out, but he's been in and out of consciousness since yesterday. Get him inside, Martha ordered, her voice stronger than she felt. Now, the men dismounted, moving with the stiffness of people who'd been in the saddle too long in. Brutal conditions. Thomas and Miguel lifted Caleb down from his horse, and Martha got her first good look at him. His face was gray beneath the trail dust, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow. Blood had dried on his temple from a gash above his hairline, and the way he held his left arm suggested broken or cracked ribs. "Kitchen," Martha said. "Put him on the table." They carried him inside and laid him out carefully. Caleb's eyes fluttered. Open briefly, unfocused and glassy with pain. "Martha," he mumbled, the word barely audible. "I'm here," she said, moving to his side. "You're home. You're safe." His hand reached for hers, gripping weakly. Then his eyes closed again, and he went still. "Someone needs to ride for the doctor," Martha said, already moving into action, her hand steady despite her racing heart. "Vernon, help me get his coat off. Thomas, I need hot water and clean cloths. Garrett, check the pantry for whiskey. We'll need it for the wounds." The men moved to obey, and Martha realized with distant surprise that she'd taken charge without thinking about it. But there was no time for self-doubt. Caleb needed her, and she would not fail him. As she worked to clean the blood from his face. To assess his injuries, Martha made a silent promise to the unconscious man on her table. "You saved me when I had nothing. Now I'll save you. Whatever it takes." Outside, the storm had finally passed, leaving the world clean and cold and new. But inside the ranch house, a different kind of storm was just beginning, one that would test Martha's strength, reveal Caleb's deepest secrets, and change everything between them forever. Doc Morrison arrived just after dawn, his medical bag clutched tight as Vernon helped him through the snow-packed yard. Martha had been awake all night, keeping vigil beside Caleb's bed. They'd moved him upstairs to his own room once she'd cleaned and bandaged his wounds. The doctor examined Caleb thoroughly, his weathered hands gentle but thorough. Martha stood in the corner, Clara asleep in her arms, watching every movement with anxious eyes. 3 cracked ribs, Doc Morrison announced finally. "Concussion. That gash on his head needed stitches. You did well cleaning it, Miss Hayes. He's lucky. A few feet further in that ravine, and we'd be having a very different conversation. Will he recover?" Martha's voice was steadier than she felt. "With rest and proper care, yes. But he needs to stay in bed for at least 2 weeks. No riding, no heavy lifting, nothing that'll stress those ribs. And someone needs to watch him for the next few days. Make sure the concussion doesn't worsen." The doctor's eyes found Martha's, and something knowing passed through them. "I suspect you're up to the task." "Yes," Martha said without hesitation. "I am." After Doc Morrison left, Martha established a routine. She moved a chair into Caleb's room and set up Clara's basket nearby. Every few hours she checked Caleb's breathing, felt his forehead for fever, made sure the bandages stayed clean. The ranch hands took turns bringing her food, water, anything she needed, but she rarely left the room. Caleb drifted in and out of consciousness for the first 2 days. Sometimes he muttered things in his sleep names Martha didn't recognize, fragments of sentences that made no sense. She listened anyway, filing each piece away like clues to a puzzle she was determined to solve. On the 3rd day, his eyes opened, and stayed open. "Martha," he whispered, his voice rough from disuse. She was at his side immediately, offering him water. He drank gratefully, then lay back against the pillows, wincing at the movement. "How long?" 3 days since you came back." 4 since the accident. Caleb closed his eyes briefly. "The herd. Safe. Vernon said you saved them. Got them all down before the worst of the storm hit." She paused. "He also said you nearly killed. Yourself doing it. Someone had to." "Someone had to come home alive too," Martha said, more sharply than she intended. "Those men depend on you. This ranch depends on you." "I depend on you," she didn't say, But the words hung in the air anyway. Caleb's. Winter sky eyes found hers, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Clara made a noise from her basket, and the spell broke. "How is she?" Caleb asked. "Growing stronger every day. She smiled yesterday, a real smile, not just gas." I wish you could have seen it. Something softened in Caleb's expression. "I'm glad she's thriving." Martha settled back into her chair, adjusting Clara on her lap. "You need to eat. I'll have Vernon bring up some broth." "Martha." Caleb's voice stopped her before she could stand. "Why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" "Taking care of me. You don't owe me anything." Martha looked at him, this man who'd saved her life, given her shelter, asked nothing in return, and felt something crack open inside her chest. "Yes, I do," she said quietly. "You gave me everything when I had nothing. You believed in me when the whole world had cast me out. You think I could just walk away when you need help? Most people would. Then most people are fools." Caleb studied her face for a long moment, and Martha saw something shift in his expression, a wall coming down, a decision being made. "There's something you should know about me," he said finally. "About why I built this ranch the way I did. Why I don't care what the town thinks." Martha's heart quickened, but she kept her voice calm. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to. I want to." He took a careful breath, his hand pressed against his ribs. 10 years ago, I had a different life. A wife, a daughter. The words hit Martha like a physical blow. A wife, a daughter, past tense. "Her name was Elizabeth," Caleb continued, his eyes distant now, seeing into the past. "We met in Denver, married young. Sarah was born a year later, the most beautiful baby girl you'd ever seen. Dark hair like her mother, but she had my eyes." His voice caught, and Martha reached out instinctively, covering his hand with hers. He gripped it like a lifeline. "We lived in a town called Silver Point, about 100 miles from here. I worked as a deputy, thought I was making the world safer. Elizabeth taught at the schoolhouse. We had a little house with a garden, plans for more children, a whole future mapped out." Martha could see it, the life he'd lost, the happiness that had been stolen. "There was a man," Caleb said, his voice hardening. "Jacob Thornton, a rancher's son who thought his family's money put him above the law. He got drunk one night and assaulted a girl from town. 14 years old. I arrested him, testified at his trial. He was convicted, sent to prison. The pieces were falling into place now, forming a picture Martha wished she couldn't see. The Thornton family blamed me, said I'd fabricated evidence, that I'd destroyed their son's life out of jealousy or spite or some other nonsense. They used their money and influence to turn the town against me. Suddenly I was the villain, not their rapist's son. Caleb, it got worse. Letters threatening me, threatening Elizabeth. Dead animals left on our porch. The sheriff told me to keep my head down, let it blow over. But it didn't blow over. It escalated." His hand tightened on Martha's, his knuckles white. "I was out on patrol when it happened. A fire started in the middle of the night, spread too fast for anyone to stop. Elizabeth and Sarah were asleep upstairs. By the time I got there, the house was already burning. I tried to get inside, but the smoke, the heat," his voice broke completely. Martha moved from her chair to the edge of his bed, still holding his hand, tears streaming down her face. "They found evidence later, kerosene, rags. Someone had deliberately set that fire. But the Thorntons had alibis, paid witnesses. No one was ever charged. And the town, they whispered that maybe I'd done it myself. For insurance money, or because I was crazy, or because I wanted to frame the Thorntons. That's insane," Martha whispered. "I lost everything that night," Caleb said, his eyes finally meeting hers again, raw with old pain. "My family. My home. My reputation. The sheriff asked for my badge the next day. Said it would be better for everyone if I just left town. So you came here. Bought this land with the money from selling everything I owned. Built this ranch from nothing. And I made a promise to myself. I would never turn away someone in need. Never judge someone based on gossip or circumstances. Never let another innocent person suffer because the world decided they were worthless. Understanding flooded through Martha like light breaking through clouds. The ranch hands, each one cast out by society, each one given a second chance. And her, an unwed mother with a dying baby, welcomed without question. That's why you saved us, she said. Clara and me. Because you know what it's like to lose everything. I saved you because letting you die would have meant becoming the very thing those people in Silver Point accused me of being, a monster. Someone who values reputation over life. Martha set Clara gently in her basket, then turned back to Caleb. Without thinking, she reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle on his scarred cheek. You're not a monster, she said fiercely. You're the best man I've ever known. And your wife and daughter, they would be so proud of what you've built here. This refuge for broken people. This place where mercy matters more than judgment. Caleb's eyes closed, and a single tear tracked down his face. Martha wiped it away with her thumb. I think about them every day, he whispered. Wonder what Sarah would look like now. She'd be 10 years old. Probably tall like Elizabeth, smart, full of questions. Tell me about her, Martha said softly. Tell me everything. And he did. For hours, as the afternoon sun moved across the floor and Clara slept peacefully nearby, Caleb talked about his lost family, the way Elizabeth laughed at his terrible jokes, how Sarah loved horses and always begged to ride with him, the garden Elizabeth planted every spring, the songs she sang while cooking, the way Sarah would fall asleep on his chest, her tiny hand curled around his finger. Martha listened to every word, bearing witness to his grief, honoring the family he'd loved and lost. When the light began to fade, Caleb's voice grew quiet. Thank you, he said, for listening, for not running away when you learned the truth. Why would I run? You've done nothing wrong. Some people would say I'm cursed, that death follows me. Martha thought about her own family's judgment, the way they'd called her baby cursed and marked by God. The parallel wasn't lost on her. Then we're both cursed, she said. And we can be cursed together. Something shifted in the air between them, something that had been building since the day Martha arrived, now finally acknowledged. Caleb reached up and touched her face, mirroring her earlier gesture, his calloused fingers gentle against her. Skin, you're extraordinary, he said quietly. The strongest person I've ever met. And Clara, she's lucky to have you as a mother. I'm lucky to have found you. They stayed like that, the space between them charged with possibility, until Clara woke and demanded to be fed. Martha laughed, breaking the moment, and lifted her daughter from the basket. Over the next week, as Caleb healed, something fundamental changed between them. The careful distance he'd maintained crumbled. He smiled more small, rare smiles that transformed his face. He asked about Martha's day, listened to her stories about Clara's progress. He let her help him without protest, accepting her care with grace. The ranch hands noticed too. Vernon started grinning every time he saw them together. Garrett made knowing comments about the boss finally looking happy. Even Thomas, usually so quiet, mentioned one morning that the house felt different, lighter. Somehow, 2 weeks after the accident, Doc Morrison returned to check on Caleb's progress. Ribs are healing well, he announced after his examination. You can start moving around more, but no hard labor for another few weeks. Take it slow. After the doctor left, Caleb came downstairs for the first time since the injury. He moved carefully, one hand pressed against his side. But he made it to the kitchen where Martha was preparing supper. She looked up from the stove and smiled. Should you be out of bed? Doctor's orders. I'm allowed to move around. He settled into a chair at the table, watching her work. Besides, I couldn't stay up there another day. I was going crazy. Martha laughed. The famous quiet cowboy, going crazy from too much rest? Even I have my limits. Clara, now nearly 4 months old and thriving, was propped in her basket on the table. She'd grown plump and healthy, her eyes bright and alert. When she saw Caleb, she waved her tiny fists and made an excited gurgling sound. "She knows you," Martha said softly. "She always gets excited when you're near." Caleb reached out and gently touched Clara's hand. The baby immediately grabbed his finger, holding on tight, and something in his expression made Martha's throat. Close up, he looked at Clara with such tenderness, such longing, the look of a man remembering another baby girl, gone too soon. "May I hold her?" he asked quietly. Martha lifted Clara from the basket and placed her carefully in Caleb's arms. He cradled her with practiced ease, supporting her head, keeping her secure against his chest despite his injured ribs. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "You've gotten so big." Clara stared up at him with wide eyes, then reached up and grabbed his nose. Caleb laughed an actual laugh, full and genuine, and Martha felt her heart crack wide open. This was what she wanted. Not just shelter or safety, but this. A man who could love her daughter as his own, who could find joy again after unimaginable loss, who could build a family from broken pieces. That evening, after supper was finished and the dishes washed, Caleb asked Martha to sit with him on the porch. She wrapped Clara in blankets and joined him on the bench swing he'd built years ago, watching the sun set over the snow-covered hills. "I've been thinking," Caleb said after a long silence, "about the future, about what happens next." Martha's heart began to race. "Oh, you've been here almost 2 months now. Clara's healthy, you're strong. You could leave if you wanted to. Make a fresh start somewhere else, somewhere people don't know your past." The words felt like ice water. Was he asking her to leave? "After everything? Is that what you want?" Martha asked carefully. "For us to go?" "No." The word came out fierce and immediate. Caleb turned to face her, his eyes intense. "God, no. That's the opposite of what I want." Relief flooded through her. "Then what are you saying?" Caleb took a breath, and Martha saw his hands trembling slightly. "I'm saying that I want you to stay. Not as a guest, not as someone I'm helping temporarily. I want you to stay permanently. You and Clara, I want—" He stopped, struggling for words. Martha waited, barely breathing. "I'm not good at this," he finally said. "I haven't talked about my feelings in 10 years. But Martha, you've brought life back to this place. To me, when I look at you and Clara, I see hope. I see possibility. I see a future I thought I'd lost forever. Caleb, I know it's complicated. I know people will talk. I know your past and mine were both carrying damage. But maybe that's exactly why this could work. We understand each other. We've both been broken and learned to survive." He reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "I'm asking you to stay," he said quietly. "Not as hired help or charity case. I'm asking you to build a life here, with me, as a family." Martha's eyes filled with tears. "Are you asking what I think you're asking? I'm asking if you'll marry me. If you'll let me be a father to Clara. If you'll give me a chance to love you the way you deserve to be loved completely, without reservation, for the rest of my life." For a moment, Martha couldn't speak. This man who'd saved her life was now offering her everything she'd never dared to hope for. A home, a family, a love built on understanding and shared pain and genuine respect. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Caleb pulled her close, careful of his ribs, and kissed her forehead, her cheek. Finally, her lips gentle and reverent, like a promise sealed. Clara, nestled between them, made a happy cooing sound. as if she understood that their broken family had just become whole. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the ranch house with Doc Morrison as witness and the ranch hands as guests. Martha wore one of the dresses Mrs. Foster had made. The seamstress had been considerably more polite once word spread about. The engagement, though Martha suspected that had more to do with Caleb's money than any real change of heart, Vernon gave Martha away. Garrett played fiddle. Thomas decorated the house with pine branches and winter flowers. Miguel presented them with a hand-carved cradle he'd been secretly building for Clara. The ceremony was simple. Judge Crawford from Silver Creek performed the brief service, and when he pronounced them husband and wife, the ranch hands cheered so loudly they woke Clara from her nap. That night, as Martha lay beside Caleb in their shared bed, his bed, now, theirs, with Clara sleeping peacefully in her new cradle nearby, she thought about the journey that had brought her here, cast out by her family for bearing a sickly child, stumbling through the darkness, alone and desperate, finding a quiet cowboy who said 3 simple words, "You're staying here." Words that had changed everything. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb murmured beside her. "How strange life is," Martha sighed. "2 months ago, I thought my life was over. I thought Clara and I would die in the cold. And now you're stuck with a grumpy rancher and a house full of misfits." Martha laughed and turned to face him. "Now I have everything I never knew I needed." Caleb pulled her closer, his arms wrapped around her protectively. "We're going to have a good life," he said. "You, me, Clara, maybe more children someday, if you want them. A family built on our own terms. What about the town, the gossip? Let them talk. This ranch has always been a refuge for people the world cast out. Now it's our home, our sanctuary. And anyone who doesn't like it can stay away." Martha thought about her sister Clara, who'd turned her back in town. About her parents who'd called her baby cursed. About Mrs. Foster and her Christian judgment. About everyone who decided Martha's worth based on her circumstances. "I don't need their approval," she said firmly. "I only need this, you and Clara and the family we're building." "That's all any of us need," Caleb agreed. They fell asleep. Like that, wrapped in each other's arms, while snow fell softly outside and the ranch settled into peaceful darkness. 5 years later, Martha stood in that same kitchen, now expanded and renovated, watching her children play. Clara, 5 years old now, healthy and bright and curious about everything, was teaching her little brother Daniel how to stack blocks. At 3 years old, Daniel looked just like his father, with winter sky eyes and serious expressions that broke into sudden brilliant smiles. A 3rd child grew in Martha's belly, due in the spring. The ranch had prospered. More land acquired, more cattle, more ranch hands who'd heard about the place where broken people could find a second chance. The house had been expanded to accommodate the growing family. Clara had her own room now, decorated with drawings of horses and flowers out through the window. Martha could see Caleb working with one of the new hands, a young man named Ben who'd been falsely accused of theft and run out of his hometown. Teaching him the ropes, giving him the same patient guidance he gave everyone who came here looking for mercy. Vernon appeared in the doorway, older now but still solid and steady. "Miss Martha, I mean Mrs. Brennan, there's someone at the gate." Martha set down her mixing bowl. "Who?" "Says she's your sister. Clara Hayes, though she goes by Clara Mitchell now. Married, I guess. She's asking if she can talk to you." Martha's hands stilled. 5 years since she'd seen her sister. 5 years since that rejection outside the church in Bridgewater. "Should I send her away?" Vernon asked quietly. Martha thought about it. She could turn her sister away, let Clara feel the same rejection she'd once inflicted. It would be justified, even satisfying. But then she thought about Caleb's words from that first night. Maybe that's exactly why. She'd been shown mercy when she deserved judgment. Been given a home when she'd had nowhere to go. Been loved when the world called her worthless. How could she do any less for her own sister? No, Martha said, untying her apron. Let her in. And Vernon, put on coffee. Something tells me this conversation will take a while. As Vernon left to fetch her sister, Martha looked around at the life she'd built, the home full of love and laughter, the children playing without fear, the man outside who'd chosen to love her completely. She'd been cast out for birthing a sickly child, but that casting out had led her here, to this quiet cowboy who'd said, "Both of you come home." And in doing so, he'd given her more than shelter. He'd given her a family, a purpose, a love that healed old wounds and made space for new growth. The door opened, and Martha's sister stepped inside, her face uncertain and hopeful and afraid. "Hello, Clara," Martha said gently. "Come in, let's talk." Because that's what they did. Here at the Brennan Ranch, they welcomed the wounded. They forgave the broken. They built families from the pieces society threw away, and they did it with mercy, with grace, and with the quiet strength of a cowboy who'd learned the truest form of healing comes from choosing love over bitterness, hope over despair, and family over blood. This was home. This was sanctuary. This was where cast-out souls found their way back to life, and Martha wouldn't have changed a single moment of the journey that brought her here. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.